Thank you all so much for joining us today and being a part of the Empathy Accelerators solutions focused on bringing together collaborations for underwater edible forests and micro and macro algal solutions for the planet. It's such a privilege here to include you in COP26 and to allow all of us to share our voices from around the world and hopefully reach some of the government officials and those that are really exploring nature-based solutions and true community resilient solutions that could have application community after community. And so it's such an honor to have everyone here. And I'd really like to introduce my dear friend Gunnar Olaffsón, who's joining us from Iceland and has been working on some truly transformational solutions for the Westfjords and also exploring ways in which seaweed could be used for remediation, for food, for really pioneering Iceland's future. And so it's such a privilege to have you join us, and it's always so good to see you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here in this excellent panel. So, as Joseph said, I'm Gunnar Olaffsón. Haven't met all of you before, but some I have. I have a very short presentation about what we are up to in Djúpið, and then I have more detailed information about what it is and what not. But we have been in Iceland realizing that one of future scenarios for us could be the algae industry. And working with algae comes pretty easy for us since we have like an amazing coastline, pristine waters, and just an overall excellent infrastructure to do so. Now, so trying to here. Can you all see my screen? Excellent, thank you. So I am the manager of Djúpið, which means just the deep, which is a small innovation center in the Westfjords of Iceland. The Westfjords of Iceland are quite peculiar. We are 1/3 of the coastline of the island, but we are only 2% of the population. It is the most sparsely populated place in Iceland, which is pretty scarcely populated on its own. So we've been, for the last years, like trying to map out possibilities for the algae farming industry and just algae industry in the country. And what we are seeing is that we need it to happen. We've had interesting changes in our natural habitats in the last years. We're seeing, well, species of fish disappearing, others emerging. We're seeing great changes that we are not sure on why it's happening, but we're trying to figure it out, sorry. And the situation with the algae industry here is, well, actually a good one. We have the possibility of starting completely from scratch. I excuse this is in Icelandic. We are working on getting into the oceans, and we are certain that our possibilities are linked to the aquaculture industry, which is already in the island. We have a lot of salmon farming around the coastline that allows for an easy entry threshold for in-water algae farming. And there is the great possibilities of utilizing geothermal energy, which we have a lot of. We are fortunate, even here in the Westfjords, that we have piping hot water just bursting out of the earth, which is phenomenal. And those of you who have come for a visit know how it looks and feels, and it is a resource that we are not utilizing to its full potential, not even close. We have the pristine waters, but we have nothing in the fjords, except for changes. And since I was a child here in the Westfjords, I've seen at least 2 of my favorite fish stocks almost completely disappear. I am an avid fisherman, and I grew up catching beautiful Arctic char in the waters. They have disappeared mostly, but we are trying to figure out ways to mediate that by working with nature on solutions. And we try to utilize the infrastructure that we have, like this beautiful old boat. We ran into pretty severe hindrances on our way. As in most places in the Western world, the legal infrastructure around algae farming or the algae industry is lacking greatly. We've been looking into models in North America, in Canada. We've been looking at how Maine was looking in, like working with their legal frameworks. We've been trying to model after our neighbors on the east, the Faroes and the Norwegians and the British Isles. And we're coming to a conclusion that we can utilize all these pieces to actually draw great examples from it. And that, in our opinion, is like perhaps the greatest possibility or the greatest like advantage of starting from scratch with no legal framework. We can try to do it well and respectfully, ensuring that local farmers and local small communities actually benefit from it. So it's not just another industry that companies can like utilize to take advantage of smaller communities, which has been a problem here as in many rural areas. The possible solutions, like I mentioned, we are trying to aim at the fully regenerative model. So we're trying to influence policymakers into actually taking into account new research in the matter and realizing that algae farming can be utilized not only as an industry that can help us blossom, but also as something that can be good for the local environment and ecosystems. We're also looking into the wonderful possibilities of utilizing the small fishing fleet. We've been looking at models in the US, like I mentioned, like the green wave model and blue evolution with Bowen. And we are hyper inspired. We're trying to figure out ways to utilize it as an end product. As anywhere else, that's one of the like challenges for Iceland. We are quite far away from market. So, but looking at biofuels, biotextiles, plastics, and biochar is something that is actually actual for us because of our energy infrastructure, which is wonderful. IMTA possibilities are what, at least for the fjord systems in Iceland, are perhaps the best bet for the communities because we already have quite an extensive knowledge on both shellfish farming, mussel farming, and salmon farms around the country, which can be a positive thing, but not entirely, unfortunately. This greatly affects how we approach it on land. One of the great interesting things happening here, as everywhere else with the aquaculture industry, is that it's moving onto land. So possibilities for on-land algae growing in Iceland or algae farming is something that we are truly excited for, and solutions there are many. We see possibilities in utilizing geothermal heat in creating smaller ecosystems on land that can actually give us, well, new possibilities, maybe unforeseen. And there is great will from the on-land aquaculture companies to actually participate in this research and development, which is also, of course, aiding them in both maintaining a relatively green image, well, at least for the land-based app, but it's also allowing them to utilize most of the nutrients that otherwise would go to waste. So we're quite excited. And this is also something that's important for the rural areas here, because we have like a very underutilized resource, which is like in this photo. These are research tanks placed within an abandoned fish factory or an underutilized fish factory, which we have in every town. Like these giants of industry gone. These can easily be turned into on-land operations or on-land hatcheries or grow-outs. And then what next? Possible scenarios as for us here, as anywhere else, long-term funding is needed for this research, but experiments in vertical macroalgae farming have already gone on their way, which is super exciting. But we have microalgae projects which are groundbreaking. We're utilizing the geothermal vents up in the mountains to link to microalgae farms, and we are creating great value there. And it has truly a positive impact on the smaller communities and the natives here, creating excellent workplaces. And I would like to mention that this is something that we are willing to take further. Downstreaming from the geothermal power plants is something that we need to be very mindful of as a possibility, both for processing and for growing. This was my super short introduction to what's up in Iceland, and I do thank you with all my being. And verið sæl, which just means be happy. It's a very demanding goodbye. So, as you can see, we are quite hopeful. We have been inspired by beautiful projects all around us, and the industry as a whole is a wonderful space to work in, because there's a lot of collaboration, and in the innovation scene in Iceland, there seems to be more will to collaborate and sharing solutions than ever before, and that is exactly what is needed, as Christopher mentioned. There are solutions still to be found that can only be unlocked via collaborations, and that's very exciting for us. It should be.
Thank you for sharing that, Gunnar. I am always just so heartened hearing the way in which that you're exploring these solutions in your community, and the ethics and the vision that you have. And so I'd like to ask, what do you feel like the global implications would be if your vision were able to achieve the scale and the support that you'd need to fully realize all the aspects, all of the maybe the applications within the Westfjords in Iceland, but perhaps in other communities as well?
So, I think if the model would come into fruition as it's supposed to here, it would primarily be job creation and value creation close to home. That is what we're trying to teach our kids, and that's absolutely what I think it would mean for other communities as well. It is local production. It is high value production in several smaller units. There are scaling issues, of course, but that's something that's being we're trying to be mindful of, that we will run into great obstacles, but I think I think primarily it would have a positive impact on the smaller communities, as I say.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's always just such a joy to visit with you. I feel like you're such a light, and it's just such a privilege to have you on our panel, and also to share the importance of these community-based solutions, which is also why I'm so excited about Bo Perry's work with Blue Evolution. He's been doing such incredible work as a pioneer in community-based models, and really focused on all the different layers and benefits to communities by taking an approach that's self-driven on the ground. And I think the ways in which he enables local leaders to create their vision and to support them in creating community resilience models that are re-indigenized to their highest possible use case is just such a transformational concept for the world. So I just feel so privileged to have you here with us, Bo, and it'd be wonderful to have you share about Blue Evolution.
Well, thank you, Christopher, for that wonderful introduction, and to Gunnar for that presentation. We should talk, Gunnar. Hopefully this presentation gives you some ideas. Let me try and get this set up here. So I am founder and CEO of Blue Evolution. Today I'm going to be talking about a new company I'm launching called Blue Evolution Technologies. The company that I founded has focused on food, and based on the last couple of years, just the radical changes and really some dramatic challenge opportunities that have emerged, I've decided that we need a new entity to pursue a different axis. So this is new, and hopefully I can circle back to the community aspect and why that's a big part of technology. It's not so much in the slide deck, but I'll follow on with how and why that is relevant and critical even. So regenerative aquaculture. Boy, we got a lot of work in defining what regenerative means, and in my case, applying it to aquaculture. And for us, it's all about growing a better future. So our mission is to build regenerative seaweed aquaculture solutions for a more livable future. And our position is that aquaculture and seaweeds in particular are greatly underappreciated as not a solution, but really a portfolio of solutions. And the technology we have developed and are developing is designed to sort of assert its potential primacy in dealing with things like climate change and ocean acidification. So in starting this company, there were sort of two big things I saw that needed to be addressed. One was poverty and displacement in coastal communities, generally fishing communities, many indigenous, and also climate, which in my definition, I would apply also to the ocean. So climate and ocean are one system as it relates to carbon. And seaweeds have this unique opportunity to deal with both climate change and ocean acidification. So it came to me sort of an epiphany that seaweeds really had some extraordinary potential in that regard. And this is sort of what I think of when I wake up in the morning. It's, daunting and could be depressing, but I would agree with, there's a lot of reasons for hope, and let's get into that. Obviously, we're not decarbonizing fast enough. So regenerative aquaculture, we want to accelerate, sorry, this error there, but accelerate the drawdown of carbon in both atmosphere and oceans. That second part is kind of important because if we're thinking about atmospheric greenhouse gases, we're forgetting the effect and role of the oceans in that unified system. We can also supply renewable physical goods and ecosystem services. So one thing you can do is drown out carbon. Another you can do is substitute high carbon intensity or greenhouse gas intensity products in different markets. And seaweeds are well, I think, suited to do that and do it at scale. Then, but important, factor that maybe is often forgotten as we talk about all these technical solutions is we want to deliver tangible, measurable benefits to local communities where we work. And that's not a nice to have in our view. Humans are part of the seaweed macrobiome. So on a farm, humans are sort of critical to the crop, and we need to invest in them and think about their resilience long term in order for the supply chains to be resilient. And in the face of climate change, resilience is every day more and more essential. So emerging from food, we've seen some really exciting opportunities emerging in non-food or non-ingredient spaces. Ingredient we would define as anything that goes into a human or a living system. So that could be food ingredients, nutraceuticals, cosmetics. It could also be ag feed. It could also be biostimulants. What Blue Evolution Technologies is focusing on is supporting Blue Evolution Ingredients, which is sort of the business that I've built, with seed and farming technology, but allowing that company to focus on that very broad and complex set of market channels. What we're going to focus on are the solutions related to the big three, as I see it. And these all relate to carbon, bioplastics or packaging, biofuels, and greenhouse gas reduction. And part of the reason I started this company is because we have some heavy hitters approaching us sort of unsolicited or serendipitously we connect, and there's a tremendous amount of interest in more of the moonshot potential of seaweed. Nestle, for example, we thought they were asking for a sample for food. Turns out that they were looking at biopackaging applications. So these are not the only companies playing in these spaces, but these are just the ones that we've sort of bumped into. And these address not only climate change, but a lot of other issues like biofuels. You have particulate air pollution in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions. Plastic, big problem for greenhouse gas emissions, also a big problem for ecotoxicity. Greenhouse gas reduction, again, we don't just want to deal with a warming planet, we want to deal with an increasingly acidic ocean. So climate tech, basically in the ocean, that's what we're looking at. And we've built these systems for 8 years: hatcheries, farms, biorefining or processing, application of products. And our current ingredient vertical is stood up, proven, selling products. And what it took to build that system, we have a deep expertise across all of these sort of interdisciplinary fields that are necessary. And I think we're already proving that regenerative aquaculture changes the world. You guys all probably know what a circular economy is, but that's something that we really take to heart and design for in our solutions. And there's a big human component to that. Lexa Meyer there on the lower right, she's our hatchery manager and mariculture manager in Alaska. She's lived there for 30 plus years. She fishes commercially with her husband Alf, who's a farmer. They have their own farm and that we help to incubate. And their lives are pretty dramatically changed. They'd say they would have left Kodiak Island if they weren't for kelp farming because fishing wasn't cutting it. And that's something I've seen in coastal communities around the world. So on a small scale, we're already showing that, they're staying where they are from and they are hoping to pass this on to their children and down through generations. So I want to talk about regenerative versus sustainable. The key with seaweed is they're the fastest growing crop, they require the least amount of input, and then the most scalable. So what do we say about sustainability? Well, we're talking about reducing harm. So no land, no fresh water, no fertilizer, no pesticides. But this list could be a lot longer on the right. Regenerative is actually moving the needle in the opposite direction. So absorbing carbon, improving water quality, deacidifying the ocean, I could say regenerating local economies, habitat benefits, etc. The question in your innovation phase is, can you push to the right on this and really, in a lot of ways, monetize the full suite of value that seaweed might bring? So we have two supply chains that we've built. One is an onshore farm in Baja, Mexico, that's growing a green seaweed. It is in tanks that we pump water into. It's a very productive system per area, but it uses electricity. And we need to use renewable energy there. We haven't switched this to solar and wind yet, but we will do that. Right now, we're focused on energy efficiency, and we've cut our energy use by about 70%. When we really get to the big scale up, our next big scale up opportunity, we'll reboot this all on renewable, and that will become a carbon negative crop. In Alaska, we have kombu and wakame, which are kelps, and we grow those in the ocean offshore. We have our own 35-acre permit, but up there, really what we're trying to do is incubate local family-owned businesses, tribally owned businesses. And we process this using 100% renewable energy, or 99.9, from the island's wind and solar, or wind and hydro grid. And it's processed in a tribally owned facility with the Shunak tribe. So really in Alaska, we have something approaching a carbon negative finished output of food ingredients. That's working with both local fishing families and local tribes. So we think that's a pretty good showcase of what renewable, or what regenerative aquaculture can do around the world. I've been here for a long time. I've put a lot of money, raised a lot of money into this company. Still need revenue, but that is starting to happen, and it's going to go from sort of famine to feast pretty quickly based on the last few months. I think what's important here is we have sort of patents and technologies, but we also have social IP, and part of that is our team. You can look at all the nice names on here, but the people on the left are the ones actually handling the seaweed. So there's the two Isaacs on the side and Emmanuel Guevara Looters down in Baja. There's Nick Mangini and Alf Pryor, both lifelong fishermen, now full-time kelp farmers. The team is rooted very much in these communities, and we consider these guys farmers. They're not cheap labor. They're partners, and they're innovators, and they're pioneers as much as I am in terms of how to actually grow this stuff consistently and at scale. A big thing I'm excited about are seed genetics. This is a totally blue sky opportunity. We've done incredible things with terrestrial genetics and seeds, some terrible things also, I might add. What are we going to do in the ocean? We need improved seed to grow seaweed at the scale and cost to do big things like plastic, biofuel, and greenhouse gases. Who owns that seed? Are we using transgenics if it means saving the planet? Some heavy bioethical considerations, and here we see a real need to sort of define, okay, what's a regenerative genetics program and seed product? Biofuels, huge market. I'll run through this quickly. Biomaterials, huge market. I think this is maybe the biggest market in human history. Carbon is going to be huge. Blue carbon, remember, there's way more carbon in the ocean than there is in the atmosphere, and it's probably worth more per ton. Why? Because we're deacidifying the ocean in addition to dealing with climate in real time. If I plant a bunch of trees and soak up carbon from the air, the ocean is not going to release that carbon very quickly. So maybe one big takeaway from today as far as regenerative aquaculture is we can get a 2-for-1 deal on the tons removed from the ocean, where when we're taking it out of the air, we're really talking about the warming, not the acidification. It does not address ocean acidification quickly. So way more carbon, worth more per ton. I think this is a gold mine. patents, we got some complicated ones, and we got some simple ones on the lower right. That one was developed by some college kids that we employ at the university. I love simple technology. And we really are trying to push out, not just like, hey, people on the ground grow stuff. No, innovate. Think about the system, like total quality management program. You know the seaweed, you know the farm, you're part of the innovation team. And I've just hired Alf up in Kodiak as an innovator, because he's probably the best farmer in North America right now, working on a $2.4 million DOE seaweed biofuels project. I don't want to be, haggling with him on price when he's really figured out so many solutions on the farm. I want him working with us to develop the technologies that then we can push out to other family and community farms. Oops. So best team, best tech, most experienced team, greatest scalability. That's how we feel about ourselves in the North American context. We're really going to take a crack at being one of the better ones in the better regenerative aquaculture companies in the world. My goal is to lead this effort. And we're really built to grow, baby, grow. Mexico, Alaska, we're now looking at projects in the Caribbean, New Zealand, and Singapore, Southeast Asia. Just to finish, I don't want to drag it on too much, but in each place I see a recurring theme, which is how do we cut in indigenous and local communities so that they're not just sort of chasing the commodity, those thin margins. How can we invest in these communities while also producing competitively priced goods? And that's the real rub. But my argument would be, again, for a resilient system, we need to find a way to reconcile those two goals, because as we build this, whatever monstrous solution to this monstrous problem, we have to remember human beings. And when we look at the ocean, indigenous issues are uniquely acute in that they have a tremendous amount of influence over or direct control over their water space. They have, in a lot of cases, a heritage, traditions around seaweed, and that relationship with the ocean that is so valuable as we try and build a new industry. So really trying to expand and sort of formalize our approach to these local and indigenous communities and bake that into our technological development. So yeah, thank you again, Chris. Hopefully that gives you a nice picture.
Thank you so much, Bo. I feel like the people that are working with algae and seaweed are not only the most pioneering, but some of the most sweet and mindful and empathic. They are doing this for so many reasons beyond business. And I've just been so privileged to get a chance to explore just a little bit of your work and the global implications. And so if your model were to receive all the support that it needs to achieve a global scale, what type of future do you foresee for us all?
Well, I'll lead with a bold assertion. I really think seaweeds can soak up all the anthropogenic carbon emissions, full stop. That is theoretically possible. So, and again, you're dealing with ocean acidification and climate. So if algae, seaweeds were to get, appropriately resourced, and you have sort of a World War II mobilization effort around scaling it up, I would argue it's one of the preferred solutions to greenhouse gas emissions, because we can tackle two of its consequences at the same time. And then in terms of communities, if we do this right and forego the mistakes of terrestrial agriculture and even industrial aquaculture, I think there's a lot of potential to really create circular economies where the Kodiaks and Bahas of the world are not seen as places to exploit and sort of drag people down this community spiral, but rather lift them up and provide some equity. We're going to get a third benefit. So climate, ocean acidification. I think coastal communities, especially rural ones, have been suffering globally. There's a lot of parallels around the world, very different places experiencing very similar things. So we can look at this as an economic redevelopment opportunity and to build in equity as all this money sloshes towards greenhouse gas solutions. Really think carefully about how that hits the ground and how that affects people's lives throughout the supply chains.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bo. I always feel more hopeful for the world after getting to hear your ideas and your vision. And I've been so passionate about helping seaweed and algae farmers around the world with finding the best solutions that could help with streamlining their value chains, making their operations more effective. And that's why I'm really excited to introduce Liane Thompson, who's been doing some incredible work with her biomimetic fish robots, which are completely tetherless. They're not funded by military. They're focused on education and capacity building on a community level. And I think for underwater edible forests, the application of her drones and monitoring and being able to manage and support the growth of these forests is really deeply exciting. And just like everybody else here on this panel, who she is and why she's doing this work is so deeply inspiring. So it's just such a privilege to introduce you, Liane, and would love to have you share about the work that you've been doing with Aquaai.
Okay, well, thank you, Christopher, for having me, actually. And it's been really great because, since we've met, which is a few months ago, I've really been able to meet with a lot of other really amazing people in the space that, sometimes you go down one path and you meet certain people and then there's like all this whole other group of people that you didn't know were doing some really great creative work and for the right reasons. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate being a part of this and being a part of this panel, and thank you. I'm going to do what everybody does now and make certain that everybody can see my screen, which I think you can. So yeah, what and who is Aquaai? So Aquaai is, we like to call the robot fish company, but it's a little bit more than that. Aquaai actually came to be from a promise that my partner, Simeon made to his daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, Emily, that he would take his skills and he would do what he could to mitigate the climate crisis, to save humanity, and to start with saving the oceans. And she asked her father that because she actually grew up in his lab. He is a roboticist, a climate expert, animatronic, special effects on movie sets in South Africa and Cape Town, where he's originally from. And she actually grew up in his lab where he was always building robots and studying human robotic interaction long before HRI was even an acronym. We're going back at least 25 years. Or no, I should say 20 years. And so where she came to him and she said, okay, Dad, enough with the land-based robots. Can you please make a robot to save the seas? And so he looked at what systems, as an inventor, he looked at what systems were out there, and he thought to himself, well, we really need something if we're going to have that larger impact, knowing what was coming down the pipeline in terms of superstorms and floods and displacement. He wanted to see a system and invent a system that could have the largest impact. And so that's what he was doing when I met him. So my background, I guess, is that I came from journalism. I was a reporter. I covered conflicts. I covered disasters. I was, in places like Haiti and the earthquake. I was in the Middle East. I put Anthony Bourdain on TV as a media executive, also with the New York Times. And I was actually in Israel at the time, and I was doing the story on the Q, as in James Bond 007 Q, the guy who made all the really cool gadgets, the Q of Israel. And that led me to Simeon. And as I said, he was in the process of building a proof of concept for a robotic fish. And I was like, a robotic fish, okay. And he believed that we had to, taking his experience from animatronics and whatnot, he believed that we needed to make a system that could withstand the harsh seas, could be in, swim up rivers and be affordable. So that was the mandate. And so this really got me. And, fast forward, we became a couple. I did the unspeakable. I, had a thing with my subject of my story. And anyways, it worked out. We ended up getting married. And when we went back to my native, which is California, we founded Aquaai. I left journalism and I joined Simeon on that mission and on that promise to our daughter to, do what we can to save humanity, and starting with saving the seas. And we founded Aquaai we were in Silicon Valley in Los Gatos at the time, overlooking the Monterey Bay when we founded the company. And we realized, there's so much talk about the climate crisis, but you can't single out just the climate. It's not just you can't ignore the ocean when it comes, or waterways when it comes to climate crisis. And so that's the area that we're facing, that we're focusing on, not just oceans, but all waters. All water, both sea and fresh water. And if you look at the waterways of today, every day there's a disaster of some sort, whether it's flooding, whether it's the nutrient imbalances that are coming from ag runoffs that are, hurting our rivers, which are then obviously causing mayhem in the oceans. Overfishing, we all know about, the algae blooms as a result of the high nutrients. And even in ports, as we have so much traffic, to ship around industrial products, we have excess traffic and contaminants in the waterways. So in looking at that, it was like the slide says, it was, oh crap, what can we build that can be ocean, swim around rivers, around corals, help with aquaculture in the ports and stuff. And we looked, and this is getting back to Simeon's mandate, affordability, accessibility, maneuverability. And so that led us to the robotic fish. So now, finally, there is what we call Fish as a Service that provides that data, that information, so that all of these players in these different spaces have the information that they need to be making smarter decisions that could ultimately, mitigate a lot of risk in the climate crisis that we're seeing today, whether it's the algae blooms, whether it's locating those nutrient spikes in rivers and saying, okay, wait, it's enough, or whether, and what our system does is it gathers the data. Data right now, such as salinity, oxygen, temperature, pH, depth, and we have the capacity to hold up to about 16 different sensors. We have 3 cameras on board. And again, we're 3D SLS printed, and we're very, very affordable. Many people ask us, why a fish? Couldn't it just be done with, some of the other systems, the torpedoes, or couldn't it be done with a box or whatnot? And the reason why we use a fish is because we use power for fin propulsion to power, so we're not reliant on thrusters, which saves on power. Again, we have very few screws and parts. Our patents are in the mechanics and design, which means manufacturing is affordable, which means the end user can afford it. So a lot of products are out there, and there are even robot fish out there. But if you look at them, they're usually university projects that are incredibly expensive once you take them to the production line. And for us, we developed the robot from the get-go with the production and the end user in mind so that they would be affordable, and they are. And so when you compare them with a lot of the other drones out there, the underwater systems, and we're talking about autonomous underwater vehicles, we still are about a third the cost of the closest competitor. Plus, we're not only able to be subsurface, but we can also swim on the surface, and we can go at different depths, and we can hover and gather the data at those depths as well. You know, we all know the ocean is a huge market in terms of looking at it from a business perspective, and everyone, the jury's still out there about quantifying it from an environmental perspective. I think we can all agree to just say, well, if we keep messing with the ocean and our waters, you know, it's about our lives, not about how much money we can make off of it. And for us, again, it's about just building that system that can affect a lot of the different lives, whether it's in commercial research or government use cases, in the case of flooding, or as you can see here, all the various use cases. Again, it was about building a system that could be applicable easily in different systems using plug and play sensors, you know, being able to pivot from, let's say, fish farms to harbors without having to go back to the R&D drawing board. Whether it's right now, I'm talking to you from Oslo, where there's a great need to monitor the harbor where everyone swims, as well as other ports in Europe where there's environmental issues and traffic issues. We also have, as we were talking about displacement earlier, I think, Bo, you might have mentioned that. You know, for us, it was about, can we get somewhere fast? So our systems are also, since we 3D and SLS print, we have the ability, and we've proven this by 3D printing 8 units in 6 weeks on an island in the Nordic Circle, on the Arctic Circle, where we can deploy in a moment's notice and be there and gather the data, help the community, because again, it's the communities that usually suffer the most. You know, help the communities, give them the tools to not only put their own robot together, but then monitor their own waterways moving forward. As I said, I'm in Norway, where we're operating in precision underwater farming, both working with sustainable salmon farmers who provide people like Whole Foods and Michelin chefs. So we tested our units in the waters in the harsh environments because we wanted to make certain that we could swim in multiple environments. I'm going to kind of not go into the video right now because we have time, or maybe I will. Sorry about that. Anyway, it's a 1-minute video, so sorry. I'll talk really fast. So this unit in particular is helping the farmers. It has sensors on it, it has cameras on it. This one is not, it's autonomous. The reason you see the tether is only to give the data in real time, as opposed to having to go to the surface. And here is Kvarøy, one of the farms that we're working with, as I already mentioned. And it's a really amazing partnership. They're also investors in our company as well. And with them, we've been able to really test and look at the farmer and understand the pains of the farmer and what works and what doesn't work for them. Let me just go a little bit further. Here's some of our recent key achievements. We're happy that we were finalists in the Pitch Fest. We weren't one of the winners, but another 20 women driving the future, finding that perfect. I'm actually happy about that, but I have my team to thank for that, and other accolades. We are going to start working with seaweed farms, so I'm really excited about doing some tests in Portugal, as well as with the European Space Agency, where we're going to be doing coastal resilience and plastic detection, subsurface as well. Great team from all over the world. I pride us so that we're like the United Nations, that everyone comes from a different country, pretty much. And we have a few investors, mostly angels, a few VCs, some really incredible partners. you can read about us here in all of this media that I've compiled. And this is our latest unit that just came out, which is pretty much on par with what any AUV out there, Navy or not. And again, we don't work with military or oil and gas. You must be doing well, doing positive and impact for us to engage. And so there's my email if you want to engage. And this is our latest unit, which is completely tetherless and fully loaded with side scanner, you know, IMU, DVL, GPS, the whole, in about 16 different sensors. So that's Aquaai. I'm sorry that was a bit longer than I anticipated, but there we go.
Well, thank you so much, Liane. And I, for one, am happy that the video happened to play. I think it's so exciting to see what you're working on. And I've just been so impressed with the depth and the breadth of thinking that you and Simeon have done around the application of your biomimetic fish. And I've always been so intrigued by the thought of having community-driven, self-organized fleets of drones that could support disaster response and that could be able to ethically support sovereignty of coastlines and helping atolls and indigenous communities to protect their reefs and their natural resources. And there's so many incredible applications for your work. But if you were able to achieve global scale, what future do you think would be in store for us?
Well, I come from a very realist perspective, I'll be honest, and maybe it's from covering conflicts my whole life, and I still have that look about what I fear is the inevitable. I do feel that there is a lot of talk. I am very frustrated by the lack of action. I'm very frustrated by the amount of studies, but that goes and the money that's poured into one study after another, but yet not into technologies that are actually bringing about change. And sometimes it's not a very popular thing to say, but I feel that unless we really start putting financing into actionable technologies, into those that can mitigate risk, that can sequester carbon, that can really shift the paradigm, as opposed to talking more about it, or let's do another university study project about it and dump millions into that. I fear that my children will not be able to swim in the ocean at all. You know, I look at the rivers that I grew up in, and we used to tube, we used to spit, you can't even go in the rivers, most of the rivers in the US anymore. I mean, for me, I'm really sad. And I think that the reason why I'm doing this, and it's been difficult, you know, for many reasons, you know, climate tech is only now in, but we're hardware, we're female led, we have all of those things. I think that I keep doing it because somebody's got to be in the grit, right? Somebody's got to be in the muck. And everybody here on the panel is definitely in the muck. And they're fighting and they're trying to, you know, turn it around. So for me, I feel that unless we change things radically and really look at technology and what can be done, then I'm afraid that for our children, I mean, it's just we're going to see a lot more displacement because of the climate crisis, a lot more. And I don't think anybody's prepared for that. And I've seen and I've walked amidst the people who are displaced. And that to me is where we should be screaming the loudest, is that no, it's just starting. The superstorms we see now are going to be a fraction as bad as they're going to be in a few years down the road. And what technologies are there? Even with the seaweed, which is beautiful. And I'm so excited to finally try our drone out in the seaweed farms, because we've lost a few in Monterey Bay where there's a lot of kelp. But you know, we all need these technologies. We need to work together about you know, bringing about what needs to take place in order to actually give our children a better tomorrow. Sorry, long answer.
No, it was a perfect answer. And thank you for being in the grit for all of us and enabling everyone's work to take a step forward. I've just been so grateful that you chose to be a pioneer and that you answered the call. And I think that goes for everybody on this panel. You know, they've had to do incredible things to be able to be here, and the obstacles that they overcame to be pioneers when, you know, it was just the early days. And we've always felt at the Empathy Accelerator that collaboration and building ecosystems of resources and having ethical companies come together and link arms, you know, community by community around the world was really the only approach that would create a future that we all want, and do so in a timeline that's relevant. And with all of these incredible innovations in seaweed and robotics and data, hopefully we can enable companies like Julia Marsh's Sway, which is harnessing the power of seaweed to make compostable replacements for single-use plastics widely available to everyone in the world. And what a beautiful future that would be. So it's such a privilege to have Julia joining us, and it'd be wonderful to have you share about your work.
Thank you for having me, Christopher, and really appreciated that whole talk. Liane, I relate with everything you said. I also grew up in Monterey Bay, so next time I'm in my hometown, I'll try to find your missing fish. Today, I'm going to talk about planet-friendly packaging made from seaweed, and I'm specifically going to focus on thin film plastics, which are pervasive. Think of retail bags, poly bags, wrappers, pouches. They oftentimes gum up recycling machines. It's virtually impossible to recycle them. They float out of landfills. They clog our sewage systems, so they present a health challenge, and they clog up our natural spaces and, of course, our oceans. So this is the focus area of our work. I'll share just a little bit about my background. I'm Julia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sway, where we're making replacements for packaging from seaweed. I have a background in brand and packaging design. And the reason I founded Sway was I often was the person responsible for bringing plastic into a brand ecosystem, and I wanted to see what I could do with it about that. Being based in California, growing up next to the ocean, like I just mentioned, I am obsessed with seaweed and ocean ecosystems, and absolutely fell in love with this idea that we could utilize and support ocean ecosystems while also solving the plastic problem. And as a designer, I thought that was a wonderful opportunity to, you know, being so close to the packaging problem, create a solution so desirable while also so benevolent. And that really started with looking at the most extractive supply chains and institutions on the planet, and then kind of being baffled by the statistics that have come out. You know, from 2020 to 2040, BP expects plastic will represent 95% of net growth in oil. And that's going to directly contribute to possible future sea level rise. You know, the title of this panel is "The Future's Underwater." Well, it may be up to a foot by 2050. And this is going to exacerbate the already considerable gap between the rich and poor, which Liane was just referencing in the last conversation. And I see this massive climate shift happening in tandem with my work as a designer, feeding into packaging systems and a rise in consumption and a greater demand for convenience and many rising social inequities. So when we talk about the plastic problem and its solutions, we need to also talk about the climate crisis and how the plastic industry feeds it, and then how the climate crisis feeds social inequity, and how social inequity then feeds the plastic problem. It's a totally intersectional issue, and we need intersectional solutions. So that's what we're doing at Sway. We've talked already a bit about why seaweed is so incredible, but I'm going to highlight specifically what we're focused on as Sway. Our core priority is that we create replacements for plastic that are genuinely home compostable, non-toxic, and plant-based. So no sneaky microplastics making their way in there, and also having this incredibly rapid degradation timeline so that when you mix packaging in with your compost bin, it's going to create healthier soil rather than just adding confusion, I guess, at the end of life. A big point for us too is designing our material for existing infrastructure. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people to work with us, and we want to make climate solutions that are accessible to as many people as possible. And then the third component is that we're working with seaweed, which is one of the most regenerative, abundant feedstocks on the planet, available on every coastline in the world. It has this incredible growth rate. Some species can grow 20 to 30 times faster than corn or sugarcane, which are the most prominent alternatives to plastics right now. We're not relying on arable land, we're not relying on fresh water, and we get fabulous performance characteristics by working with seaweed. Our material at Sway, which is now a patent pending material, is stronger than traditional plastic. It's heat sealable and resealable. It can be stored much the same way as paper without degrading, but once it enters a home compost environment, it's going to have a radically lower carbon footprint than paper when you look at the GHG emissions that happen if a material does go to landfill. Here's a little demo video. Here you can see that lovely heat seal, a totally transparent film. I'm modeling this poly bag with a Pangaea t-shirt, which is also partially made from seaweed, so that the enthusiasm runs deep there. We're focusing on poly garment bags to start, as well as retail bags. But then we'll start to expand in other packaging applications. We're also already testing all sorts of different colors and textures and opacities to see which materials shoppers love the most and resonate the most with. And really our goal from sea to soil is that our material is going to replenish life at every step of the supply chain. Bo already started to touch on this, and I'm going to talk a bit more about it as well, but we at Sway responsibly source our seaweed supply from farms based in North and South America to account for the massive scale that we project in the coming years. So that means we're prioritizing seaweed farms that are working in adherence with the ASC MSC seaweed standard. And we're also trying to collaborate as much as possible with source communities to recirculate value and diversify the types of seaweeds that we're working with. You know, we recognize that this is a beautiful, regenerative, giving crop, and we need to collaborate as much as possible. So I thought it'd be fun to include this image. This is a visit we made down to Bo's farm down in Baja. That's my co-founder, Matt. Gorgeous facility, incredible people. And we saw firsthand how people and organizations like Blue Evolution are directly impacting coastal communities and providing reliable sources of employment for communities that have been affected by overfishing. So really inspiring work. And we want to just ensure we're never over-extracting on any one species of seaweed. We want to encourage the idea that we can work with different regions as we build this big blue economy. So just as you're thinking about the future that we're building, I want you to envision hundreds of hectares of thriving seaweed farms, which are actively helping ecosystems flourish. I want you to picture a whole array of fully circular packaging where bags and pouches and mailers and wrappers, and eventually Karuna's about to talk about it, but straws and utensils via lollyware are actually being composted rapidly and turning into nutrient-rich soil. And I want you to imagine how relieved you might feel to know that the packaging that you interact with on a daily basis is helping sequester carbon and supporting coastal livelihoods. That's the future that my team is building currently. We'd love to collaborate. So if you're interested, our door is open. Please find us at Sway the Future or swaythefuture.com. I'm Julia, and yeah, just thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's so exciting to see what you've been working on. And I, for one, have been keenly aware of how our plastic packaging affects our endocrine system and how these packages for our food, for so many things are poisoning us. They're poisoning our families and our children and our futures. And most people have no idea that the dirty secret of organic food is plastic. And so I'm so excited about your applications and what it could do for the food industry and so many other industries. And if you were to say, what would be your vision for achieving global scale? What would be the impacts? What would be your ultimate dream if you were able to receive the support you deserve?
Quite a few things. Mainly, of course, it's alleviating plastic waste. We're talking about millions and millions of tons of plastic diverted from ocean and landfill. But it also has to do with sequestering hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon, supporting the blue economy, creating thousands of new jobs. So it's really just, it's about ocean health, but it's also about human health, bringing more people into the climate movement. If we create a truly replicable model, you know, the average person can say, just by shopping at the grocery store and buying, you know, a pack of nuts or whatever, I'm partaking in the climate movement. I think that's a really cool way to mobilize more people and allow them to create a more inclusive climate movement. So those would be our main sort of points of focus.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. And thank you also for mentioning Karuna Rana and Lollyware and the work that they've been doing. I think that by bringing everyone together so that we can focus on our expertise and not waste money kind of building solutions in silos and coming together can allow us to achieve the scale that we all hope for the world and for these incredible transformational solutions. And so it's also such a privilege to introduce Karuna from Lollyware, which is an award-winning materials tech company focused on replacing single-use plastics with seaweed-derived alternatives. Thank you so much for joining us, Karuna.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and hi, everyone. And a special hi to Julia. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and everything that Sway is doing. I think we need so many more companies like Lollyware and Sway because we have such a big task ahead of us to replace a lot of plastic. So I'm going to try to quickly share my screen. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen. Just get it better in terms of the view. Okay, so I hope you can see it. Yes, so as Chris has mentioned, I'm Karuna Rana, and I am the head of climate impact and policy at Lollyware. And before I tell you more about Lollyware, just a little about myself. I am a climate activist, ocean lover, especially because I come from a small island myself. I come from a very pretty small island found in the Indian Ocean. It's called Mauritius. And if you haven't heard of it, Google it and you would want to add it to your bucket list. So growing in Mauritius, obviously, you know, we've been very close to the ocean, not just in terms of recreation, but we depend so much in terms of, you know, livelihoods and tourism and so much of it. So I have worked in the climate and ocean space for more than 10 years. And a lot of it had to do in really multiple sectors. So funny enough, the first experience I had working in this space had to do with being reducing the ecological footprint of the local Coca-Cola bottling plant in Mauritius. So that's how I had started my career. And then, you know, from there, I got into nonprofits and I got involved a lot into tracking UN climate change and ocean-related negotiations. So it's really exciting because I now have been working with Lollyware for more than 1.5 years. And I think it's exciting because, you know, starting my career with trying to reduce the environmental impact of a company like Coca-Cola to a nonprofit space where I worked a lot on ocean and plastic pollution to now, you know, helping Lollyware and the team with this super exciting product that we have, and helping it make a huge impact in the climate space is really a privilege. So it is, as I said, a very privilege to be here and to work with Lollyware, because I'm joining you at a very, very exciting time in the evolution of the company. And that's because we have successfully built a viable, cost-effective, carbon-negative alternative to single-use plastic. And no surprise, it's made out of seaweed. So super excited to share more about our work with a community that is so focused on creating a better world. So moving the slide. So what is Lollyware? Lollyware has a very simple mission. We want to advance the planet towards a plastic-free, decarbonized future with products that are designed to disappear. We've been founded in 2015, and we are an award-winning materials tech company that is based in the US. And we are replacing single-use plastics, and we've started with the world's first seaweed-based straw, but we have 6 other products in the pipeline until 2024, and a lot of these have to do with the food service industry. So quick one, the problem. I'm going to start with this quote. So the biggest problem that we face as humanity is shifting human consciousness, not saving the planet. The planet doesn't need saving, we do. So a lot of the speakers before have talked about the problem that we face in terms of the ocean and climate change. Julia just talked about the problem of single-use plastics. I won't, belabor too much about it, but just because of COVID-19, 30% more plastic waste has entered the ocean. Julia rightly put it that the oil industry is actually in a big problem, and they are using plastic as a bailout. So that is pretty scary in terms of the future, where a lot of their income is going to come from plastic. And even if the problem is so bad, global plastic use is expected to double in the next 20 years, according to the World Economic Forum. And that would account to around 15% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. We all know what the problem is. And one of the worst parts about plastic, which in particularly really scared me, is a lot of science that has come out in terms of the health impact that plastic has been having on us, including newborn babies. So, and that is because a lot of the highly toxic chemicals are found in 80% of food packaging materials. So this is why Lollyware was created. The inspiration was really to do with, we want to get rid of plastic and all the toxic stuff that comes with it. But 2 other things that are super important. Firstly, that we cannot tackle the global plastic problem in silo. So we need a scalable solution that also collectively tackles climate change and biodiversity loss. And this is where seaweed plays a very key role. And secondly, we wanted to attempt to rewrite the story of single-use packaging, which is, over-engineered to last forever. And we wanted to rewrite it to design to disappear. So this is how, Lollyware was born, and we call our technology SEA, which is seaweed-based emission-avoiding alternatives to plastic. So SEA is a new category of biopolymers, as I mentioned, made from seaweed. It's biorenewable, regenerative, carbon-sequestering input. Our technology uses a proprietary seaweed-based formulation for the development and application of seaweed-derived materials and products that closely replicate the mechanical and physical properties of common petroleum-derived plastics. And now, by applying SEA to single-use items and packaging as one-on-one replacement, we are advancing the planet towards a plastic-free, decarbonized future. I also wanted to quickly jump into, ocean-based climate solutions. That's something Lollyware is really pushing forward for. So Lollyware, as a company, and the product that we are producing is an ocean-based climate solution. And ocean-based climate solutions are very important to highlight, especially when we talk about the future, because we often see the ocean as a victim, not an ally. So even if the ocean is at risk, it's so central in reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also important to highlight that ocean-based climate solutions could deliver up to 21% of emission cuts needed to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, something that we've been talking about so much during COP26. I don't think I need to give too many examples, but here are a few. These are some of the ocean-based climate solutions. Obviously, companies like Lollyware and Sway are examples of those because we're using seaweed to replace plastic. I also won't talk too much about blue carbon, but because a lot of us already know about it, but it's very important to highlight that blue carbon is like planting trees, but better, because very often when we talk about Lollyware and our product and we want to promote blue carbon, we ask what it is, and it's so difficult. Sometimes it becomes difficult to explain, but when we talk about blue carbon and planting trees, it's so much easier, and a lot of people are not aware that it can be 5 to 20 times it can absorb 5 to 20 times more carbon dioxide per unit area. And I think we've seen a graph from one of the panelists before. Why seaweed? Again, this has been talked about a lot. I wouldn't go too much into the details, but one thing that it's important to highlight is, we talk a lot about this seaweed in terms of being very good with climate change mitigation, but seaweed is also amazing in terms of climate change adaptation because it helps with dampening wave energy and protecting against coastal erosion. It also helps with coastal acidification. It helps with providing oxygen-rich habitats to combat oxygen deoxygenation due to global warming. It also absorbs dissolved nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in coastal waters. So it helps with improving water quality. And finally, it provides healthy biodiversity hotspots and habitats for so many marine species. So seaweed is amazing because, there's this thing that is called the triple planetary emergency, which we see as, climate change, plastic pollution, and biodiversity loss. And Lollyware being able to use seaweed in this new capacity to replace single-use plastic means that we're able to tackle all the three together. So what have we been able to achieve? So as I mentioned, Lollyware has been able to develop the world's first seaweed-based drinking straw. We've been able to build a very diverse and global group of planetary visionaries, scientists, engineers, business leaders, strategists, and technologies, which obviously we share a same vision of a plastic-free decarbonized future. We've created deep domain expertise and a seaweed material database because we've been working this space, as I said, from 2015. We've received inbound interest totaling 440 million straws. And as I mentioned, our straw is ready to launch. We'll be launching it pretty soon. And we had launched a prototype in 2019, but the one that we're launching in a month is actually a commercialized version of the first drinking straw prototype that we had. And this drinking straw is home compostable, ocean safe, all made from natural food grade ingredients, scalable. It doesn't forego user convenience because it's single use. And most importantly, it comes at a competitive price point. We've also optimized our production plan because we've been able to successfully run it on existing plastic infrastructure. We've reduced material and operating costs. We forged a very robust sustainability and thought leadership model, which I look into. And we've generated valuable IP and developed defensibility strategies. So we already have a patent, and we filed up to 3 more patents. So those are pending. Okay, I'm not able, okay. So, just to give you an example of why we decided to go with straws and how critical that problem is a company like Starbucks itself has not been able to find the right solution to their plastic straw problem. And, we might think that there are so many plastic alternatives on the market. As we know, there's paper, there's PLA, but very little is known about their true carbon impact, Because very often when we talk about replacing single-use plastic, we talk about, it being home compostable, it being completely biodegradable, which is very, very important. But the one thing we don't think about is the carbon impact. So we ran studies to compare the different alternatives that exist on the market, especially when it comes to plastic straws. So we took the most common ones, PLA and plastic, PLA and paper against plastic, and the results were pretty shocking. So the results are such: we are replacing plastic with alternatives that have a carbon footprint 2 to 3 times higher than plastic itself. If we're looking at a net zero future by 2050, we cannot replace plastic with alternatives that have a carbon footprint that high than plastic itself, which is why solutions that are coming from a carbon sequestering input like seaweed becomes very, very important. So, as Lollyware, as I mentioned, this is why we've made this commitment. We're very excited to launch this very new initiative that we've termed as Double Carbon Delete Initiative. And through this initiative, we will be deleting carbon in 2 ways: on the back end through carbon sequestration via the seaweed supply chain that we have, and on the front end by avoiding carbon dioxide emissions that as a result of displacing plastics, and as I mentioned, other high carbon footprint materials. We have made a commitment, a very ambitious one, to replace 1,000 tons, to remove 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year by 2023. So that's pretty, it's a bold, ambitious commitment we've made, but we see it very important for the future. I wanted to end this presentation with, doing a discussion about why it's so important to invest in blue carbon-based innovations and products. Because we are aligned with COP26 right now. As I mentioned, it's so much, using seaweed in this capacity means we can tackle 3 problems at once: climate change, plastic pollution, and biodiversity loss. We're also advancing a circular bioeconomy future. This is the vision we have as Lollyware, where we want to, from the stage that seaweed is formed right to the end of life, we want it to be we wanted to fit very well in a bioeconomy vision, especially one that benefits coastal communities. Speaking of that, improved livelihoods is something that is very important when we talk about ocean-based solutions, because, as I said, I come from a small island developing state, but we like to call ourselves large ocean states. And coastal communities who highly depend on ocean resources, this industry would be proving to be very, very beneficial to them. So ocean-based solutions, especially blue carbon-based solutions such as seaweed, would enable the growth and longevity of small seaweed farms and coastal communities, contribute to their socioeconomic well-being. It's very important to note that most seaweed farms are women-owned and run, and also minority-owned and run. In Indonesia alone, over 1 million coastal Indonesians engage in seaweed aquaculture. As I mentioned, it builds a new blue circular bioeconomy for millions of people worldwide, especially those most impacted by climate change. It also promotes a new revenue stream and return on investment. Carbon credits offer that new revenue stream. Obviously, there is a lot of controversy around carbon credits and the way we need to design it, especially when we're starting to talk about blue carbon. But that said, it's still very important to look into. Blue carbon credits have such huge potential to be included in national governments and their nationally determined contributions, and also company emission reduction plans. It provides a better valuation for ecosystem benefits. In some cases, the return on investment can be far higher than the overall 1.5 ratio due to the scale of an actual product. So regenerative business models and supply chains is what we see as the future. It also helps achieve sustainable development goals, and these are the 4 SDGs that we are directly addressing through the work of Lollyware, but there's also the others that I've highlighted here are the ones that we will be indirectly addressing through our work. There are some gaps and challenges that I'd like to end with. Blue carbon science and data, especially for seaweed, is very limited. So as a company, we have this big vision of removing 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide by 2023. It would it would require very strong blue carbon science and data. So we are working with Dr. Carlos Duarte, who is an award-winning marine ecologist in this field, and he's done so much study around it. He's part of our scientific advisory board, so we're hoping with his help, we'll be able to tap into that data. There is other gap and challenges in terms of high investment and cost in the beginning when we talk about solutions that have to do with blue carbon and ocean-based, especially before we scale up. R&D process, these things take a lot of time. People want an immediate solution. So that's another challenge. And finally, fiscal policies that are needed to support research and development in this sector. So that's something that, these are some of the gaps and challenges that I wanted to put out and would be very interesting for us to think about, especially when we look at the future being underwater. So, and the last one is obviously getting the word out. So yeah, I'd be very happy to discuss more about that. And it's super exciting to be hearing what everyone is doing, and would love to collaborate. So feel free to get in touch. We've all shared each other's contacts. So yeah, that's it from Lollyware. And sorry I took longer.
No need to apologize. Thank you so much for sharing what you did. I just can't wait to start using your products myself and to share them with my family. It's just so exciting just to think of what your work could do just for a company like Starbucks. I mean, just it makes me a little sick to my stomach thinking about how many plastic straws I've personally been responsible for over the course of my lifetime, and so many other single-use plastics. And it just feels like the way that you're approaching this and your vision for the future could make these single-use items fun and exciting and good for us and good for the world. And it's such a paradigm shift. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. And I was really impressed with your goals for carbon sequestration. But could you tell us a little bit more about your ideal vision for the future? If we could support you, if the world could support you in fully realizing your vision, what would that be?
I think as I said, it's such an ambitious goal. So as I mentioned, the first gap that we face is really the numbers. So we really need to strengthen blue carbon science and data, because that would be key in terms of measuring how much carbon we are able to sequester through the supply chain. So that's on the back end. On the front end, we are also measuring how much plastic we can replace through our straws, but also the other products that we have in the pipeline, because Lollyware is not just a straw company. So in terms of, like how this can be supported, it's so big, the vision that companies like Lollyware or even Sway has is huge, and there's so much we can do in terms of as individual companies. It's very important for us to be able to get the word out. I think one of the big challenge is very often our products are compared with plastic in terms of their cost. And the cost of plastic is really not something we should be competing with or comparing with, because it doesn't reflect the true cost of plastic that is being the true cost of plastic on our society, on the oceans, on everything. So definitely I would say around the costing, that's one thing that we should have more data on, that what is the true cost of plastic. And I know a lot of work is being done on that. And the other thing is that, as I mentioned, many of the plastic alternatives that exist on the market are only taking the biodegradability factor, some of which are even not doing that. For example, PLA, it needs to be industrial compostable. It only can be composted in an industrial facility. And this is what we're trying to change. We want to have a product that you can put in your backyard compost and you don't have to worry about it. So, there needs to be more education around that, not just to consumers, but also to policymakers who are thinking that they're doing really well by replacing plastic with products that are biodegradable, but in real may have such a higher carbon footprint. So, which is why, as I mentioned, it would be great to, especially as we're talking about COP26, it would be great to think about fiscal policies in terms of investments needed for research and development of solutions that are blue carbon based. For example, we talk a lot about seaweed, but in real, we barely even explored the tip of the iceberg of seaweed chemistry and also the types of polymers that we can derive from it to replace single-use plastic. So there is so much more need of research into this space. As I mentioned, we also need financial incentives to make alternatives like, suede products and lollywares products more competitive on the market. Even if we are cost competitive right now, it's taken us so much time to get here. And again, we don't want to be compared to plastic. And then, I think there also needs to be a lot of work done, especially in North America, around a social licensing and permitting to grow seaweed, because we will need a lot of seaweed to meet our goals. And the science proves that there is enough space to grow the seaweed industry up to 2,000 times more than what it is right now. In a way that would provide ecological benefits rather than impacts. But this has to be planned very carefully. But most importantly, we would need to, get over that barrier that exists. For example, in the US, it's easier to get a license to pump gas and oil in the ocean that grows seaweed. So if we are to talk about the future and the ambitious goal that Lollyware has with the climate goals and replacing plastic, I think we would need to have a lot more seaweed grown and would need to, really boost seaweed production, and social licensing and permitting needs to be much, much easier.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those insights. I feel just so heartened that we've had the chance to connect, and that you're a part of this panel, and that we can build towards collective solutions and kind of leverage everyone's wisdom and experience to kind of solve these issues more effectively together. And I so appreciate that you brought up the issues around understanding exactly how much carbon is being sequestered, how ecosystems, how the world is being impacted truly by using these regenerative practices and solutions. And at the Empathy Accelerator, we've been exploring some partnerships with some large tech companies that are potentially going to help us with more effectively understanding how different types of seaweeds are sequestering carbon in different ecosystems with different variables of light and temperature, water toxicity, nutrients in the water. And I think by building out a common framework and protocol for underwater farmers and algae companies to be able to have a system that can align everyone, that can make everything a little bit more clear and digestible for the global markets, it could be so transformational and allowing these companies, these community farmers to be able to access global carbon markets. And for us, we've felt like carbon is maybe not the right holistic approach. It's not, it's maybe just the first step in kind of the awareness that's evolving around the planet. And I think for everybody a part of this panel, we realize that there's so many other benefits that come from these solutions, that come from having underwater farms, that come from seaweed, from deacidifying the ocean to building biome. And I feel like Joseph Palant, who I met at COP25, is working on some truly pioneering work in carbon sequestration. And he's been someone who I've been deeply impressed with, someone who I've been hoping that we could also learn from. And he has some really unique experience in his work with blockchain for climate, which solves complex climate challenges using blockchain technology. And they're a team of leaders from the cryptocurrency, climate, and technology communities striving to stitch these disciplines together. And I think that's what it's all about right now, is how do we stitch all of these disciplines together? How can we make it easier for all of these ethically aligned companies to collaborate, to support each other? And so we've been meeting with a number of Indigenous community leaders here at COP26, and I've been really impacted by the response of Indigenous leaders to the carbon markets and how they've been feeling like carbon on its own is a commodity or a commoditization of their ancestral lands, of the species and ecosystems that are their family, that are as much a part of them as the fabric of their DNA. And so I'm so excited about how we could go beyond carbon, supporting land back and helping Indigenous communities to reclaim their ancestral lands and to provide truly nature-based solutions. And I feel like utilizing platforms like Joseph's and the wisdom that he's brought together and the ethics that he has, he could help us all get there together more quickly. So it's such a privilege to have you join us, Joseph, and I feel so grateful to bridge COP25 and COP26 with you.
Thanks so much, Christopher, and all of you, and really fascinating and lovely to see your presentations and learn about your work and kind of vibe into it. And excited to engage with some of the points brought up by Christopher. So I'm Joseph Pallant. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, on the traditional territories of the Squamish Nation, the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I wear a couple of hats. I'm the Director of Climate Innovation at EcoTrust Canada, a national charity building economies that provide for life. I'm the founder of Blockchain for Climate Foundation, and we're putting Paris Agreement on the blockchain to connect the national carbon accounts of the world to enable cross-border collaboration on emission reductions, and then just sort of engage a lot in the space, helping support people doing really neat things kind of at this intersection, and also consider myself as having a responsibility to share the knowledge that I have and expertise that I've accrued over the 17 years that I've been working in this space. And one of the things that happens when you work in something that has ups and downs, like climate action, is that people and expertise kind of get shaved off in the bear markets and the low ebbs of things, and have to go do other things with their time. And so you lose expertise if you're not able to capture it somewhere. So feel like I have a responsibility there to a very significant extent. And, Christopher, you brought up the concerns and the really lived impacts of Indigenous communities sharing their experiences at COP around how RED projects, reduced emissions through deforestation and degradation, have in some cases, caused them to be taken off their land or exclude traditional activities on a landscape that they used to be able to use and have used since time immemorial, and the really negative aspects of that, and how the tool is in some cases being used as kind of a recapitulation, a whole new way to be colonial and take land away. And in working on this a lot and thinking about it a lot, one of the things that becomes clear from that critique is that carbon markets and carbon offset projects and the systems of tenure around them are extremely powerful vehicles. And as with everything, something with a lot of power can be used for good or it can be used for ill. But kind of in that problem, there is a solution, which is that these tools are very effective at securing land rights and land tenure and a say over what happens on a landscape. And if you kind of get where I'm going, that is, I think, some of the most valuable tools or the most valuable things that we can support Indigenous communities with is new tools to secure their tenure and management of landscapes, to enable them to address their own priorities, and to create an economy around doing it. And I recognize that people are uncomfortable with the commoditization of carbon, but in a RED project and in a forest conservation project, the alternative is you're also commoditizing that landscape, but you're commoditizing it as 2x4s and then as soybeans or as corn or something on that landscape. And so even to not get into the discussion of commodification, if you've got to choose a pathway, I would much rather support a commoditization of securing land control and management by Indigenous communities based on creating emission reduction outcomes, which is something that we all know that we need. And another, to make it a lot more solid and less theoretical, here in British Columbia, the most effective carbon offset projects that we've seen have actually been from First Nations, our Indigenous communities, protecting their landscapes. So we have a project called the Great Bear Rainforest Project, which protects coastal rainforest from just a little bit north of Vancouver all the way to Alaska. So essentially our whole mid and north coast, where it used to be sort of carte blanche for logging. And this project came together with, I believe it's 13 different nations, and a lot of work from the government and also collaboration with the logging companies to protect 80% of that landscape more than was protected already. So to really claw back a massive proportion of that logging. And so that achieved the goal of protecting that landscape from logging, which is critically important. And a lot of that landscape is home to the spirit bear, which is a sort of specific, it's not even a subspecies, it's like brown bears and black bears, but that are actually have a rare white trait. And so it kind of adds with that charismatic megafauna that really helps that gem. But the thing that was so clear there is that if it was just taking the logging out of that landscape, we'd protect the forest, but a major source of revenue for these communities, a lot of whom are completely isolated, would dry up because they're reliant on the resource revenue from cutting down the forest. And this is a major issue here in BC, and I think all over the world, which is, as we try to move to a lower carbon reality, as we work to solve the problems that humanity has created, a lot of the times without a lot of deep care and attention, it could have massive negative impacts on people who've grown up to rely on those resources and on that resource extraction. And I think that's where carbon is such a critical piece of the puzzle, because it has a market. We see a growing demand for emission reduction outcomes. And so it's a really good fit. And we're using specifically this tool to support projects in British Columbia and also out in Ontario to support First Nations to get management control over their landscape. In one case, it's 1.5 million hectare crown game preserve. It's like, does it get more colonial than that? Where 100 years ago, they kicked all the First Nations off of these, it's like 3 million acres, and put a train around it to like hunt and stuff. And now we're getting control of that back for these communities, and stopping or reducing a significant amount of the logging there, and having that revenue go to those communities. So I get to see the stuff work on the ground in community, and it's a big part of why I know it can be done well, and why I believe it's so important to be done well. one of the key things that people can often misunderstand the market and even me when we talk about carbon, 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 and climate, 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 is that we think it's the only piece of the puzzle. And I'm sure that in some situations it really is. That's all that people have on their mind. And it's kind of the alpha and the omega. For me, that's really not the case. A lot of my projects have been forest restoration and then into improved management and conservation. And so clear the social and environmental co-benefits that are created through that. And there's some really neat standards like the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard that actually work to objectively lay out what are the community benefits across sort of array of pathways, what are the biodiversity and other non-climate environmental benefits. And I think that this kind of thing can be really helpful in pairing with projects that sort of lead with their carbon and climate foot, that there are these other benefits. And, you know, we don't always need to, you know, bullet out the intrinsic benefit of making life better and making the environment better, but we have the opportunity to. And sometimes it's a really good fit, and people who feel it and get it, like us on the call, are actually in a good position to clarify that and to do that work of translation for people. And so I really just think of carbon as it's the foot forward. It helps us pull the whole thing, our whole projects, through the eye of the needle, and very particularly so in the kind of work that I do. And as I'd mentioned, it's the projects that make this all worthwhile, and that helped me push through, you know, the ups and the downs, and then also the critique of these systems, because I know we can do it well, and I get to see the projects on the ground. So whether it's First Nations forest projects here in Canada, and also in the States and California, there's really neat projects, waste management projects where we're able to deploy technologies that are absolutely available, but they're just not economically viable or common practice, to do composting, to do biodigestion, to create new low carbon fuels, whether it's cook stoves in Africa or in India or in places where there's unsustainable wood harvest, and a lot of indoor air pollution that we can fix with either more efficient wood stoves or replacing with other non-wood combustion stoves, and also enabling renewable energy penetration. And I do think that a lot of the renewable energy offset projects or sort of done and dusted as renewable energy becomes the lowest cost new energy supply around the world, which is just amazing. But there are still places that need that support. I realize in that there's something really important, and I won't go into all the qualities of what a carbon offset is, but one of the key ones is additionality, that the project wouldn't have happened without it being a carbon offset. What's so important about this is this can be a time-limited thing. We are all trying to achieve this vision of the future that we know we need. And ideally, there's a period of time where the technologies that we're working on need support of a carbon market or of grants or of philanthropy. But, you know, I can tell really clearly by looking at everybody's work on here that we're working for, you know, commercial and real world scalability and uptake and impact, where people are using these pathways, people are using these products because they're the absolutely best thing there, and it's what people want and it's what they demand. And so I think it's also valuable to recognize tools like carbon offsets as a transitory period for certain types of projects that we can get to reality. An example is in British Columbia, there was a period of time where we could do landfill capture projects where you're capturing all the methane and either flaring it or beneficially reusing it. And that lasted until 2012, when regulations came in and said, from now on, all landfills have to have this technology in place. They can't just belch methane to the atmosphere. And so I encourage that vision. I'll maybe just sort of pop, I recognize we're getting close to time. So a couple other of the key points that I have, you know, I think that finding a product market fit is something that's clear and kind of on the mind of the entrepreneurs in this space. And, you know, we do it with the tangible things that we create. We do it with, you know, the algae that's being produced or our plastics. And I think looking at environmental assets and the option for the creation, certification, and marketing of environmental assets in that same way. If we have a product, oftentimes we can't just, like, you know, provide it to the market and hope something's going to work. So trying to sleuth out where is there demand for these other you know, tangible or intangible benefits that our work creates, and you know, to try to find a round peg in a round hole, and to keep working on really finding that fit. And sort of in that lens, I really encourage ocean carbon projects that are working on sequestering carbon or having a climate benefit, to keep engaging with the carbon market space and to really take a run at it and see if there's an opportunity there. I got started in forest carbon development in 2004. And back then we did not have the standards and protocols that enabled us to create a carbon offset. And so we had to build them, and it was tough and it kind of sucked a lot of the time. But now these tools are here for people to use. And I think that there's such clear climate benefit from so many different ocean related projects, that you know, continuing to take a run at fitting that benefit into, you know, the round peg round hole of demand for provable climate action can be a great fit for projects. One of the sub pieces which I just really have to throw in is, when we're looking at climate impact of ocean work and seaweed carbon, to separate out the so if your seaweed sequesters carbon, it's sequestering carbon, and that's amazing, and it clearly does because it grows big and it grows fast. In the cases where people are going out, for example, and weighing it down and dropping it down below the thermocline so that carbon is going to the ocean floor, I think that there's a clear long-term sequestration. Where we're actually taking that and eating it, or composting it, or having it used in an ephemeral fashion that's going back to the atmosphere, the carbon benefit that can work for carbon offsets, and I think even conceptually for climate, can actually less come from that direct sequestration, but more from the replacement of other more polluting alternatives. And so that durable carbon benefit is from say eating seaweed, is that you didn't need to go and grow land crops or grow animals or other things like that and have those emissions there. So it's just a little nota bene on carbon accounting of this work. I know that Christopher had mentioned our Bitmo platform and our blockchain for climate work. And, you know, it's a really key time around COP26. I'm a huge fan of the COP process. It's absolutely not perfect, but it's the one venue where we have all governments of the world represented negotiating our climate future. And so, of course, it's going to be crazy to have Saudi Arabia and Norway and Mauritius and Canada and the US all at the table trying to come to consensus. Things can only happen by consensus, but if it's not being done there, where the heck is it going to happen? And I think when people take really big swings at COP and get really upset about it, I like viscerally feel this as like they're doing the fossil fuel monopoly's job by tearing it down. And so finding a way to be constructive, I always look for that. You can learn more about our work at Blockchain for Climate. You can look us up, blockchainforclimate.org. We're building a tool to enable the issuance and exchange of national government carbon credits that would be produced through a hopeful agreement on Article 6 this week. And by ingesting those onto the blockchain to enable a quick start and really connect the opportunities to get and keep carbon out of the atmosphere all around the world, including so many of your projects, to the capital in demand for the climate impact that's achieved by those. And so we launched live on the Ethereum blockchain this week and are really excited about that work. So we're getting close to time, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak about all these things and meet all of you and to see Gunnar. And I get family time to do this because we send Gunnar cute videos of my son and he sends cute videos back. And so it's great to have this global community of people connected through the sea and through the water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And it's really inspiring and heartening that you've developed a community-driven model, a community-based model, instead of a lot of the colonial carbon G2G frameworks that are being widely shared here at COP26. And perhaps this is just a stepping stone in the evolution of how these global carbon markets are thinking about climate. But it's so exciting that you've been able to identify a model that helps bring funds directly to the front lines of climate impact, and that you're really helping everyday people, which I think is the most critical thing. And I've just been so excited with all the work that you've been doing in NFTs, and there's so many interesting applications of your work. And I've also been kind of curious, what is your vision, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if you were able to get more of these colonial carbon markets to be able to realize the error of their ways and to adopt a framework like yours?
Yeah, well, I would say, gosh, the world is as it is, and all we can do is change it. We are absolutely right here in this moment, and the only thing we can do is go from here. We can't go back. We have to go forward. And so engaging with the structures, Liane was talking about being a pragmatist, and quite evocative about what contributed to making you that way. And I think, gosh, the governments are here, they're making these decisions. These decisions they're so much better than so many other decisions that governments make. And it's like, is it a Trojan horse? Is it a thin edge of the wedge? What is it? We have this opening where the world is galvanized. They recognize that climate impact needs to happen, that it's a massive issue for humanity. And so do not be disheartened. Find your tools, find your solutions, see where in this matrix of what's being, created in the wide world and by governments, and deliver there, and use what's being made available, help support the creation of better systems. I think things like today's call and galvanizing the community around ocean solutions is exactly the kind of thing where you can land, geographical bases like the Westfjords. You can create technology, you can have products, there's an opportunity to play their game and win for our constituencies. And I think that's the case more now than ever. And so, some things we have to be conscientious objectors to, and I would never stand against that. At the same time, looking for where there's opportunities for our modalities and how we work in the world. I don't think there's ever been a better time.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but we just got a question from the audience for you, Joseph. Jamie shares, thank you for your inspiring talk. How can we avoid carbon sequestration credits falling into a way of greenwashing, i.e. companies buy credits to claim carbon reduction without reducing carbon in their manufacturing process or business operations?
Yeah. Well, I think the basis, or the spot where we need to get to, is that those offsets that they're buying actually are real additional proven emission reduction outcomes. And understanding that if we're achieving that, and they're doing the footprinting right, that they actually are able to solve for the climate impact of their work. Where we find them wanting in terms of other impacts, or that it creates a environment and an ecosystem where bad things are allowed to happen, we want to fight those battles where we find those battles. So I think that the principle that a ton of carbon in or out of the atmosphere is the same as any other. Ton in is the same as ton in, ton out is the same as ton out. It is an important bedrock. And so where I think we have to go from there is be like, great guys, thank you for doing the absolutely critical base level work of carbon neutralizing your process. But we need you to do so much more. We only got to them doing that carbon offsetting, say, by pressure from some lower spot to where we are now. Why would it would be artificial to just stop. So I would say lock in a commitment for all these companies to go carbon neutral. Like, that's great, take a W on this, and then keep going forward to the other impacts that we feel are negative and need to be solved and go there. Because, you know, then we've got at least the climate part out of the way, or at least sub portion of the climate part, and keep moving. So I recognize that this, you know, people will have other opinions on this, which is fine. But, you know, I see this moment as, you know, let's take the win and keep moving.
Thank you so much for that insight, Joseph. And I also want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if someone has to jump off to another engagement, please just speak up now. But I wanted to ask the group, since I'm here at COP26 and I've been meeting with government leaders and community leaders from around the world, what would be your individual message for all of the delegates? You know, what would you wish for coming from COP26? Maybe Bo.
I got to run. I got to talk to Jeff Cohen, who's founder of Expansive, and I think they're the largest digital offset trading company in the world, about this very topic. So this discussion, actually, I'm going to pipe it right into the next call. I think what I'd like to say to people is there's a lot less trade-offs with the oceans and seaweed if we get it right. And there's a lot of room to deploy these solutions, literal room. There's a real gold rush happening right now around carbon, around seaweeds. Let's get this right. Let's bake in the social equity and address indigenous issues, right? And get all these co-benefits so that we're not myopically focused on carbon at the expense of social or other ecological factors. That's all doable. I think collaboration is key. We need policy and funding support to get it right. And we'll have to build this plane and fly it, but it can take us very far. I want to come back to, it's not 20% that it could do. It could do 100. We could chill this planet with seaweed. It might actually become a problem. I think it's just a matter of frameworks, policies, organized fundraising, and good innovation that considers human relationships as an area of innovation as much as what's your mousetrap for, say, sequestering carbon. So that would be my message. We've got a real golden opportunity here. Let's take advantage of it and let's make the most of it and avoid the obvious mistakes. We don't need to repeat them in the ocean. We can get a lot right. We can apply wisdom. Thank you, Christopher, by the way. Also, this was fantastic. And thanks to all the other panelists. I got to talk greenhouse gas, blue carbon. Joseph, I want to catch up with you.
It's such a joy having you. Take good care.
Thank
Aloha. Who else would like to go next? Is there anyone feeling inspired?
Well, I have to jump too, so I'll go next, if I may. I think I would like to say, in terms of policy and in terms of resources, financial and other, the shift should go, I would love to see happen, is a global shift, a global mindset away from factors about military complex and more into the environment, into a future of working together, as we all talk about, but even more so about finding, and I think this is something that we all maybe experienced to some degree during the pandemic, is that everyone kind of went back to some of their core beliefs or hobbies or whatnot. And I think that whole idea about shifting from just, productivity to actually enjoyment that is getting true to what you should be doing, and in a whole global shift to that, as opposed to just, how it's been before, churning out products, churning out food, churning out weaponry, and just move away from that about kind of trying to have a whole complete mindset about how do we want the future? How do we want our planet to be? How do we want to engage with one another? And that's what I would love to see more focus on.
Thank you.
I love that.
Liane.
I love that so much. Do you mind if I hop in? Because I'd just love to riff on that, which is that some of our favorite examples of climate solutions have emerged as a result of collaboration and facilitators of collaboration. Like, we were recently in the Beyond the Bag Challenge consortium. And so we saw direct competitors, Walmart, CVS, Target, and a number of other brands kind of setting aside their competitive priorities and just bringing a bunch of solutions together to try to find industry-wide change. And so I think any sort of legislator who's willing to support industry-wide collaboration is something we should be seeking, in addition to, not just prioritizing the carbon component, but also focusing on biodiversity loss. Biodiverse lands are more climate resilient. It's so inherently obvious and a wonderful opportunity. And I think also just, too often the climate conversation kind of omits the component of social justice as well, which has been very much a theme in this conversation. So I hope that the solutions that were just highlighted between these few organizations create a sense of hope, but also inspire the need for collaboration.
Thank you for those words, Julia. That's so poignant and relevant. I'm so grateful you were here today with us. Karuna, would you like to share?
Yes, because I need to hop off as well. So, I'd just like to reiterate, I think, a couple of things that I had highlighted previously. And, the first thing that I want to say is that a climate solution should cater to the needs of both the present and future generations. And it is because of this very lack of consideration for the future generation that we are in this triple planetary emergency of plastic pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Speaking of which, I want to reiterate that we cannot tackle the climate crisis in silos. We also need to work on tackling, biodiversity loss or plastic pollution, and vice versa. They all need to work together, and solutions have to be built in a way that we're not tackling one problem and then creating another one. And the second thing that I would like to say is that we really need a lot more investment in nature-based solutions. Right now, I don't have the exact numbers in mind, but the last time I read about investment in nature-based solutions, it was less than 5%. If I'm not mistaken, it was even like 1 to 3%. So, we're talking about the 1 billion, the 100 billion investment in climate action and whatnot, but we really need to up our game and have more investment in nature-based solutions, especially ocean-based solutions.
Thank you so much for those words.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a joy. Thank you so much. Thank you all. This has been so inspiring, and I feel like if COP26 could end by hearing all of you, it would be a very different conference. It would be a very different future. So it feels like such an honor and a privilege to be here with you today and to amplify your vision and your voices. I think there's nothing more important that I could do with my life and that we could do at the Empathy Accelerator. So thank you all so much for joining us. And Gunnar, it's always just so good spending time with you. You've been such an incredible ally for all of us, and for me especially at the Empathy Accelerator. And I'm just always so inspired by your generosity of spirit, and so it feels like just so fitting that you started us off, and now we'll bring our session to a close.
Thank you, Christopher. Again, I'm super honored and happy to be here with you guys. The work of the Empathy Accelerator is life-changing. And I want to address a point that Liane came on to, which is the space in between creation and academia, which is something that we're seeing emerging here in Iceland as a better funded space, which is creating solutions which are what we all here are working towards. And that is like a true joy to be working in that space, and gives me absolute hope that, yeah, that this will all go beautifully as we hope. So thank you all.
Thank you all, truly. It's been really heartening ending my night after meeting with government officials since the early hours of the morning and running around COP all day. It's really helped me feel grounded and hopeful and just so deeply grateful. So wishing you and your families every good thing and sending aloha here from Glasgow.